The Korean War was North Korea invading South Korea to have complete communist rule. The Korean War was a key pivotal moment after World War II, yet it was called the Forgotten War. It ended isolationism, the policy where countries stay out of foreign affairs. It was a key outcome of this war. The war also proved the United Nations would work.
The Korean War started on June 25, 1950, and ended on July 27, 1953. It was an armed conflict on the Korean Peninsula fought between North Korea and South Korea and their allies. North Korea's allies consisted of China and the Soviet Union, while South Korea was supported by the United Nations, command led by the United States. This war started at the end of World War II. Korea was split along the 38th parallel into two occupation zones: the Soviet-backed Communist North, led by Kim Il-sung, and the U.S.-supported capitalist South, led by Syngman Rhee. Syngman Rhee, tensions between the two regions escalated as both sides sought to unify Korea under their respective ideologies. However, the war has never really ended. The fighting ended in 1953, but no peace treaty was signed, leading to the ongoing Korean conflict.
The United Nations, led by the United States, intervened to support South Korea in its struggle to defend its independence and maintain its democratic government against the spread of oppressive communist ideology, which was rapidly advancing in the region. The conflict escalated when North Korea, with strong backing from the Soviet Union, launched a full-scale invasion of South Korea, swiftly capturing most of the country. This sparked widespread international concern, as the spread of communism was seen as a significant threat to global stability. In response, the United Nations, under the leadership of the United States, mobilized a multinational force to come to the South Korea's aid, making a critical turning point in the conflict. The UN's involvement provided South Korea with crucial military support, including troops, equipment, and air power, which allowed them to not only push back the North Korean forces, but also reclaim their territory they had lost. This intervention was a decisive factor in turning the tide of the war, as South Korean forces, reinforced by UN troops, regained significant ground and even pushed into North Korean territory. This shift in momentum ultimately led to the signing of an armistice agreement in 1953, which ended the fighting and established a ceasefire along the 38th parallel. Although the armistice did not make a formal peace treaty, the UN's role in the conflict helped preserve South Korea's democratic government and prevented the complete takeover of the peninsula by communism.
The United States played a crucial role in the United Nations military effort to defend South Korea during the Korean War. Without the U.S. support, South Korea would likely have fallen under communist control. President Truman led the U.S. into conflict, which ultimately concluded under President Eisenhower's leadership. The war also contributed to Eisenhower's vice presidency. One of the earliest engagements is the Battle of Osan on July 5, 1950. It marked the first U.S. involvement, with around 400 American troops entering the fight. Despite being initially pushed back alongside South Korean forces, the United States suffered low casualties compared to the North Korea, largely due to the logistical challenges faced by the enemy. The U.S. presence and the military strategy were pivotal in halting the North Korean advance and turning the tide of the war.
This war had an array of weapons, including the United States using a U.S. rifle caliber, a .30 M1 or an M1 Garand. It was a basic shoulder weapon of the United States shoulders, also using a pistol caliber .45 M1911 A1 as the standard U.S. sidearm, as they used a bunch of other weapons like bazookas, automatic, and semi-automatic weapons, also using machine guns and hand grenades. Both sides used artillery and motors, and wore armor as part of the war. The communist main weapon was infantry rifles, like the Russian 7.62 millimeter carbine, a bolt-action rifle of 1944 to Japanese 7.7 millimeter Imperial Army rifles. Other weapons used were submachine guns, semi-automatic weapons, machine guns, and Chinese hand grenades. Both sides used an array of weapons, but there were many air battles in the Korean War, and was even the first large-scale jet-to-jet fight. The Korean War completely ended isolationism, which is key in preventing disasters from happening. Isolationism is where a country stays out of foreign affairs and alliances. It was used to protect a country's economy and avoid costly wars, but people saw this as leading to a disaster. Ending isolationism led to countries to agree international agreements and have increased security through NATO.
The Korean War may be called the Forgotten War, but it made some important moments in history, like the containment policy where it prevented the spread of communism. This pushed America to join wars like the Korean War, Vietnam, and Cold War conflicts. Communism was a threat to the U.S. because of the threat to free trade, free elections, and individual freedom. And nuclear weapons also increased this. The containment policy was important in the U.S. joining in wars where we needed it. If it weren't for this policy, the world would not be the same.
In relation to the effects of U.S. aid on Korean economy, there has been an argument that has criticized U.S. aid for destroying economic basis of Korean agriculture, establishing a consumer goods-oriented industrial structure, and thus making the Korean economy dependent on the U.S. Criticism of economic effects of U.S. aid in Korea was based upon the following logic. First of all, critics argued that most of the initial aid items were food, medicine, and other necessary consumer goods. Although these aid items were indispensable, industrial faculties were also badly needed. In contrast, most aid for North Korea from the USSR and China was industrial machinery and faculties.
There was a conflict between the Korean government and the U.S. on how to utilize the remaining counterpart fund, except for the portion for defense expenditure. Korea wanted to spend it in order to expand and reconstruct SOCs and key industries, including some heavy and chemical industries, while the U.S. wanted to spend on stabilizing the Korean economy and maintaining regional securities through acquiring enough supplies of urgent and indispensable needs. Instead of immediate industrialization of Korea, the U.S. even recommended that Korea resume trade with Japan for needed goods and to form a kind of anti-communist bloc through corporations.
We have an interview from a U.S. soldier named Jim Crevinston, who served with the 7th Infantry Division as a tanker during the last year of the Korean War. Well, I asked you the questions I gave you in advance. Do you have any overall impression about the Korean War you'd like to share? Crevinston, from the government's point of view, I think it was a necessary war to stop the spread of communism. But from the actual military standpoint, I think it could have been coordinated a lot better, especially the part I was in. While you're in a defensive position, even though defense is not a good military place to be in, you're better off being on the offense trying to gain something where the results you can see. And we couldn't much see the results. If you just say, well, this is the Mutal line and we're going to draw it there, even though it had a ceasefire and it was supposed to be a truce.
After 3 years of effort to bring peace, South Korea, along with the United Nations and the Soviet Union, worked hard to reach an armistice with North Korea. Negotiations began on July 10, 1951, with the aim of halting the fighting and establishing a ceasefire. Finally, on July 27, 1953, an agreement was reached, effectively ending the hostiles and creating a ceasefire between the two nations. Casualties in this war were brutal, especially on the citizens, where 2 to 4 million lives were lost, and the U.S. lost approximately 360,574 lives, and South Korea having a 1.3 million casualties, including 415,000 dead. The Korean peninsula remained divided on the 38th parallel, with the demilitarized zone, established as the most heavily fortified border in the world. Despite this agreement, the war was never officially ended, as no peace treaty was signed to end the conflict. This war cemented the division of Korea, a legacy that continues to shape the region's political landscape and the tensions between the two countries.